Hey everyone, Mike Lindstrom here. I'm excited to be with my guest and friend, Dr. Kevin Ashby. Another in an interview. I call these the modeling series, where I get together with professionals that can bring to light modeling, which is what we call the duplication of success. Kevin and I have known each other for a bit. I'll let him tell the story about how we came together originally. But I was really intrigued when Kevin told me about a program he's working on as a doctor, a physician in Southern California, in the topic of burnout, physician burnout, which is obviously mental health, such a big thing in our country. So I want to bring on Dr. Kevin Ashby. He can tell us about his background. We'll get to the story in a little bit. But first of all, Dr. Kevin Ashby, thanks for coming on today.
Oh, thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate you having me on the program today. And it's been great knowing you, working with you. We met through a common friend, actually, an anesthesiologist that I know very well, who's a very, very good friend of mine. And he had wonderful things to say about you. And I've really enjoyed our work together and our continued work together as well.
Right.
Uh, I'm a gastroenterologist by trade, a stomach and intestine doctor. I do colonoscopy, and I was in a large practice for many years, which included both inpatient and outpatient work. That is, work in the surgery center as well as work in the hospital. And as time went on, that work in the hospital became more and more and more onerous. And I was getting home at 8:30, 9:30 at night on a regular basis. And pretty soon thereafter, I really became burned out. Initially, I didn't really know what my options were. So I felt like I was in this cage and I just couldn't get out. As time went on, my thinking kind of expanded and I thought about what my different options could be. And fortunately, I did foresee options that would make me happier and bring me more happiness in life and decrease my burnout. And I eventually pursued those, and life is much, much better. Because of that, I wanted to reach out to other physicians who were experiencing the same thing that I have experienced. And in fact, at the doctor's dining room at our hospital, they're not smiles present. There are looks of despair and there's complaining and this, that, and the other about their current situation, about the practice of medicine, about the electronic health record, you name it. There's a lot of complaining and unhappiness. And when I see the doctors walk through the hallways in the hospital itself, oftentimes I see looks of unhappiness on their faces. So I made the decision that I wanted to be someone who would really help these doctors and make a difference in their lives.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, and that's got to be hard to reconcile. I mean, for you going to school all that time with this passion to be a doctor and excited to give and whatever drove you to be a doctor in the first place, and then you practice, and then at some point in your career and your life, you're going, no, this is what it was all cracked up to be. That's got to be a tough thing. So help us understand, like, how does this happen? I mean, this happens probably in a lot of different businesses, lawyers, doctors, dentists, things I've heard about in my research before this interview. But what's the reasons? Like, why is this happening? There's got to be triggers, or there's things that are happening to get us to this point. You would think you worked that hard to get to be a doctor, it'd be all great, but that's not the case. What's going on?
Absolutely, Mike. There are several things that cause burnout. So I like to think of it as the 10,000 foot cause, the 10-foot cause, and the 10 micron cause. The 10,000 foot cause or causes include things that physicians have no control over, which is practice of medicine itself in the United States, which is Medicare reimbursements, how poorly Medicare reimburses physicians. Um, Also, just the practice of medicine itself, like I was alluding to, it's very tough. It's very tough being a doctor. There are more and more demands placed on you on a regular basis. That's a 10,000 foot level. The 10-foot level, the 10-foot cause is where you're practicing, your own environment. It could be a small group, could be a large group, could be a solo practice, but it's something that's within your reach. And for many, many physicians now, it's a group. In fact, the majority of docs that are graduating from medical school are going into employed models. So more and more and more and more, you'll see doctors that are in large groups, Kaisers or Memorial Care or this, that, or the other. Tenet or multiple different organizations. And that is what I call the 10-foot level. There are issues within those organizations that can cause burnout. How many patients they're making you see per day? What's the culture of the group itself? Are you able to get along with the electronic health record and work it out, or is it a real big problem for you? In fact, I did a study about 7, 8 years ago of doctors in my local area to see how much time they were spending on their electronic health record. And it turned out that 15% of the doctors polled were spending 4 hours after they finished their work, 4 hours doing their charting. So if you're at home, you get home at 6 o'clock at night and you're charting until 10 o'clock at night, what kind of life is that, right?
Yeah.
That's clearly going to be a cause of burnout. And now getting to the third cause, what I call the 10 micron cause, that's you. That's your individual self.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is we as physicians can actually be a large reason why we're burned out. Getting back to what you said about go through medical school, you have all these hopes and expectations. I call it a purchase proposition. When you buy into something,
Mm-hmm.
you purchase it. That's purchase proposition. When your purchase proposition is different than reality, that difference, that delta creates stress, creates unhappiness, etc. So
Yeah.
let's just say you grew up in Iowa. Your next door neighbor was a urologist. And that urologist, great person, has a home or had a home in Aspen, had a home in Boca Raton, had a boat, blah, blah, blah. Now, you live in Southern California, you become a urologist, and your purchase proposition, what you buy into is, as a urologist, I'll be able to have these things because that's what my neighbor had. Well, welcome to the land of managed care, Southern California. The incomes that exist in Southern California for your urologist are not those that would exist in the Midwest or perhaps the Southeast. So your expectation is here, the purchase proposition's up here,
Yeah.
but the reality is here.
Yeah.
And that delta, that difference can create anxiety, depression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I do tell my docs they have to really figure out what are they buying into? What do they expect out of their practice? And is that real? Is that reality?
Yeah, that's something that a lot of patients, and I've been a patient before, they don't think about. I was looking in some of the stats, a lot of reasons that may cause, and this is in no particular order. They talked about bureaucratic tasks, too many hours, computerization, EMR was right up there in the top. Inadequate money compared to what they originally thought is, to your point, purchase proposition. Health insurance, dealing with health insurance companies. So there's certain things you're talking about this high of 10,000 feet that we just can't influence, right? I mean, unless you're going to change government, change legislation, change the state, city you live in, you talk about. So talk to me about some of the teachings, because I know you're doing live events or you do virtuals as well, and you coach people on this stuff. So some of the things that you share with me in private, I love, but I'll speak to that because more at the 10-foot level and the 10 micron level is where you kind of swim, because you're not trying to change the 10,000 foot level, at least not at this point. Speak to us a little bit about some of your teachings there.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. So when I put on a seminar or when I'm just talking one-on-one with a physician, I make the point that it's really key to figure out what's making you unhappy. And of those things that are making you unhappy, what's changeable, what's not changeable. And I have my docs look at the 10,000 foot level, 10-foot level, and the 10 micron level. And to your point, you can't really change those things at the 10,000 foot level. So if that's a major cause of your unhappiness, that's a problem. That's a big problem because that really can't be changed very much. If it's at the 10-foot level, your electronic health record system, or you're just spending too much time documenting, those potentially can be changed by speaking with the administrator at your medical group and seeing if you can get a scribe to do the dictations for you, et cetera, et cetera. So at the 10-foot level, certainly things potentially could be changed depending upon the culture of your organization. And on the 10 micron level, even though it's near and dear to you and you can kind of figure it out by talking to people like me, Figuring that out and actually changing it are two different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can figure out what the problem is, but making the step to change takes courage. In fact, when I was in my previous situation and I realized, I put things down on paper, I realized what was causing my unhappiness. Even after writing this down and clearly delineating what the problem was and clearly making a decision to change that, it took me 2 years to go from the phase of making the decision to actually acting on that decision. So it's not always so easy.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm big on takeaways, right? I do live events like you do in different genre. And I know when you're delivering to your groups, you want them to have immediate takeaways. They're not going to revolutionize the industry. You and I both knew that at the high level, but what are the things they're going to walk out of listening to you and say, you know what? I can change that, and maybe they hear that story. Well, it took Kevin 2 years. Maybe why do I need to wait 2 years? Maybe I need to start with writing it down. What are some of the things that are big takeaways that you can share with our audience that would benefit? 'Cause I know you're bringing a lot of value to docs out there. Speak to that.
Sure, sure. The first thing that people have to realize is that there's more out there for you than what's on your current radar. As physicians, we're so used to thinking, okay, I'm a GI doctor, or I'm a cardiologist, or I'm a primary care physician. I'm going to go to the office for X amount of hours per day, and I'll generate income from seeing patients. It turns out there are many, many different things that physicians can do outside of clinical practice. A good friend of mine joined a startup. Basically, he's the chief medical officer for a startup, and he's loving it. He's having a great time. You could be a medical director, you could do utilization review, you could teach, you could do clinical research. There are many, many things that are available to you as a physician that most docs don't see on their radar. Because on their radar is just, well, I am a urologist and I do procedures and that's what I do. But if you have more expansive thinking, you realize there are many, many things out there that are possible. That's number one. Number two, if you're unhappy, you've got to believe that it's possible to achieve a better state. It's possible to feel better. It's possible to have a better career. It's possible.
Yeah.
That belief is super important.
Yeah.
And those are two of the things that I talk to my colleagues about. And the third thing is I have the docs write down what's getting to them, their points of pain, if you will. And of those points of pain, which are the most changeable immediately?
Yeah.
So it could just be, for instance, a buddy of mine had Wednesday afternoons off every week, but he never really got Wednesday afternoons off because he was in the office until about 2:30, 3 o'clock, and then he'd leave. So he had about 2 hours off instead of half a day. So what I told him was, think about, instead of having a half day off every week, take a full day off every other week. Take every other Friday off and don't go into the office on that Friday.
Yeah.
And that was transformational for him.
Great.
Basically had 3-day weekends every other week.
Yeah.
And he enjoyed that time and he took the time off.
Yeah, that's great. That's good advice. Thinking outside the box. I think a lot of people do. They get boxed in any trade profession where you think that little scope is all you have, and expanding that, it's such a powerful thing. So let's talk about who should be concerned about burnout. I mean, there's no like prototype. It seems like it could be all over the place, male, female, depending on what stats you read, older, younger, depending what line of business you work. You're an ER doctor versus a urologist. All that aside, okay, you see this firsthand. Who should be concerned about burnout?
You'd think, Mike, that probably the mid-career physician is the doc that's going to get burned out, right? And that actually is true. That's the highest number of burnout percentage-wise in terms of where they are in their career. But it turns out docs in training are burned out. Docs early in their career are burned out. So you really can't, and male, female, the numbers are almost equal. So you really can't find a specific type of doc that's going to be burned out per se, even specialty wise. While there are some differences, ER docs are more burned out than pediatricians, let's say, there are some differences. but the differences aren't that great.
Mhm.
Burnout rates are between 40 and 55% across the board.
Mhm.
So the rates aren't that much different.
Yeah.
So rather than imagining a certain prototype, the important thing is to realize that 40% or so of doctors are currently experiencing burnout, over 40%.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this isn't an issue just for doctors. It's actually an issue for patients and for the organization, the hospital, the medical group, et cetera.
Mhm.
It's an issue for the patient because it turns out that if a doctor's burned out, that doctor's care that that doctor delivers is not as good as doctors that aren't burned out.
Yeah.
It turns out if the doctor's burned out, there's higher malpractice rates, malpractice issues, I should say. If the doctor's burned out, patient satisfaction scores are actually lower. So it does affect patient care. And
Mhm.
the organization should be concerned about this as well, because the higher number of doctors that you have that are burned out, the higher the chance you'll have doctors leaving. And now you've got to hire another doctor, and that comes at a significant cost.
Mhm. All right, I got to hit this one because I know when you do live events, you get questions, and we get these on chats too. So we always want to speak to the questions. So we saw the study. You and I've talked about this. July of 24, the AMA comes out and wants to say, "Oh my gosh, this first time that's been under 50% in 4 years." Now, I want you to speak to this because I thought that was a little skewed. I mean, the stats may be true, but you have to think about what we're being compared to here. So speak to a little bit of that because it's not all rosy when you say, hey, for the first time in 4 years, we're below 50%. Great that we're seeing this trend, but speak to that a little bit.
Sure, sure. So some data came out recently indicating that burnout rates among physicians has decreased a tad. And while that's to some degree a good thing, the rates are still quite high. Let me give you an example. What if there was a virus that once you got it, there was a 60% chance you'd die, but the virus mutated and now it's only a 48% chance you'll die? That's still not a good number. So, so yes, the numbers have come down largely related to COVID. COVID really, really took its toll on physicians and nurses and on all hospital employees. The numbers have come down since COVID, but they're still horrendously high.
Yeah.
Even if you have a number of 40%, if 4 out of 10 doctors are burned out, that's really, really, really an unfortunate and scary situation.
Yeah. I mean, you think about anything. If you had a pilot that's flying your plane and that 50% of them are not happy with their job, a teacher, 50% of the teachers don't want to go in and teach my kids. Not good.
Not good.
It's not good. So I want
Not
people to
good.
see that parallel. Yeah, we like to see downward trends, but you have to put that in perspective. All right, Kev, I always leave takeaways. We're going to wrap it up, but I always want any parting thoughts, with the audience out there. It could be patients, docs, people that are listening to you. You have a lot to share. We could talk for hours on end, but I always want to leave my guests with one big takeaway. What would you say?
And this is not just for physicians, but the takeaway for anybody who's having challenges at work or in their life, two things. Number one, figure out what's causing that challenge. And of those causes, what's changeable, what's not changeable. And number two, you've got to believe that things can get better. Things can get better. They certainly did for me.
Yeah, that's great. Dr. Kevin Ashby, thank you so much. Being a good friend on top of that and offering me good advice as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care,
Absolutely.
Mike.
All right.